The entire Hamas leadership survived Israel's assassination attempt in Qatar. Everyone is now questioning what is going to happen next in the negotiations. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the Israeli military reportedly carried out over 500 bombings in the last week. 250,000 Palestinians are reported to have evacuated the areas of Gaza City. In another arena, Palestinians carried out a shooting attack in Jerusalem, leading to major IDF retaliations in the West Bank. You're watching the Israel-Palestine Report with Professor Alon Burstein. Hit that subscribe button. Let's dive in. On Tuesday, September 9th, Israel carried out a series of airstrikes in the Qatari capital of Doha, targeting the Hamas leadership residing in the country. Now, for those who want a detailed play-by-play summary of that attack, including the weapons that were used and who was targeted, I suggest checking out my previous video. I published it 2 days ago, and I'll put a link in the first comment below. What I'm going to do here instead is give a broader overview of the events that precipitated that attack, how we got here, and where are things now with regards to the hostage and ceasefire negotiations. So, the week began on a very different note. After U.S. President Trump revealed that the United States is negotiating directly with Hamas with regards to the hostages and a ceasefire, on Sunday of this past week, the U.S. delivered to Hamas a general framework proposal for a complete end to the war and the release of all hostages. This was mediated by the Israeli peace activist Gershon Baskin, who I'll say was also a crucial player in negotiating previous deals between Israel and Hamas. And the framework reportedly included the release of all 48 hostages, that is the living hostages, and returning the bodies of hostages, in exchange for thousands of Palestinian prisoners. The IDF canceling Gideon's Chariots B, that is the IDF's main operation that it is now threatening to launch in Gaza City. And U.S. President Trump giving his personal assurance and mediation of a complete ceasefire and an end to the war. It added that Trump will give his assurance that fighting will not resume so long as negotiations on an end to the war continue, and later reports also stated that this deal included a full IDF withdrawal from Gaza that would be contingent upon a future government taking control in the area. As that day progressed, and again we're still in Sunday of the past week, Israel responded that it is favorably considering Trump's proposal, but expects Hamas to reject it. And Trump issued a statement that everyone wants an end to the war, and added that Israel accepted his terms, and it is now time for Hamas to accept them, and adding, and I quote, "I warned Hamas of the consequences of not accepting the deal. This is my last warning, and there will not be another one," end quote. Hours later, Hamas issued a statement welcoming all efforts to end the war, and emphasizing its willingness to negotiate, now quoting Hamas's statement, "the release of all hostages in exchange for a clear statement on ending the war and a complete IDF withdrawal, and establishing an independent Palestinian committee to govern the Gaza Strip, with clear and public statements of the enemy to hold up to its end of the deal," end quote. In other words, neither side publicly fully accepted Trump's proposal. Israel said it is favorably considering it, and Hamas said that it is willing to negotiate aspects of it. The following day, on September 8th, amidst the ongoing fighting in Gaza, a shooting attack meanwhile took place in Jerusalem when 2 Palestinians from the Katana and Kabeba villages in the West Bank arrived in the Ramot junction in Jerusalem and opened fire at 2 Israeli buses that were stuck in traffic. 6 Israeli civilians were killed in that attack and 21 were injured, 4 of them badly injured. The attackers themselves were shot and killed. Immediately after that attack, the Israeli government vowed retribution against Hamas, with Israeli Defense Minister Katz stating that the act will have far-reaching consequences, and adding, "Whoever sponsors terrorism and guides terrorism will pay the full price." Meanwhile, later in that same day, Reuters reported that the Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed Thani was applying substantial pressure on the Hamas leadership in Doha to agree to Trump's proposal, and that the Hamas leadership was going to convene in order to discuss this. The following day, September 9th, Hamas's military wing, the Al-Qassam brigades, publicly claimed responsibility for the attack that was carried out in Jerusalem the previous day. Within the hour of that statement, as the Hamas leadership was convening in Doha, the Israeli military launched at least 10 ballistic missiles, reportedly from the Red Sea area, targeting that meeting where the leadership was supposedly convening in order to discuss the latest negotiations and proposals. Now, as I said before, if you'd like more detailed information about that attack and also specific details about whether or not the United States was involved, I suggest check out that video that I uploaded on September 11th. A link to that video appears in the first comment below. However, regarding the aftermath of that attack and what we know 5 days later as I'm recording this. First, 6 people were reportedly killed in that attack. However, by now it appears clear that the entire Hamas leadership survived that assassination attempt. The 6 who were killed include Himam al-Haya, who is the son of one of Hamas's most prominent figures and the main target of the assassination attempt, Khalil al-Haya. In addition to him, Jihad Lebal, who is Khalil al-Haya's chief of staff, was also killed. 3 bodyguards of the Hamas members were killed, as well as Corporal Bader Saad Muhammad al-Dusari, who is a member of Qatar's internal security force. In the initial reports immediately after that attack, there was a lot of confusion regarding the condition of the Hamas leadership. However, by now, multitudes of reports have stated and confirmed that the entire leadership survived, and Hamas itself issued a statement on September 12th, stating that Khalil al-Haya, again the main target of that assassination attempt, survived the attack. In a moment of analysis, however, I am going to say that Asharq al-Awsat reported on September 10th that at least 2 of Hamas's leaders were injured in that attack, and one of them was badly injured. And the fact that Hamas waited an extra 3 days since that attack in order to confirm that Khalil al-Haya survived, and even then did not publish any pictures of al-Haya, just stated that he is alive, may indicate that he is one of those people who were injured, possibly even badly injured, and thus his survival may not have been confirmed until a few days later. Again, that's speculation on my part, but it was relatively uncommon that Hamas said that everyone survived, but didn't explicitly say anything about the individuals, and then 3 days later said, we can now confirm that Khalil al-Haya survived. I am estimating that he might have been injured in that attack, but again, that is speculation on my part. So, where do things stand now after that attack? First, with regards to the political ramifications of the attack, the list of countries issuing condemnations of Israel's attack is somewhat endless and includes, among others, Qatar, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iran, Oman, Turkey, Algeria, Syria, and Kazakhstan, as well as Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, Russia, and the UN General Secretary, again, and many more. On September 10th, Canada's foreign minister stated that Canada is examining its relationship with Israel following that attack. And on September 12th, the UN Security Council adopted a unanimous resolution that was supported by the United States as well, condemning that attack in Qatar. The EU also issued a statement relating both to the attack and the situation in Gaza, stating that it is suspending its bilateral relations with Israel and is proposing a partial suspension of the association agreements between the country as well. Qatar itself also issued several statements, calling Israel the Israeli enemy for the first time, and stating that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is dragging the Middle East into chaos. In addition to all these, the Arab League is due to meet in Qatar on Monday, and the Lebanese Al-Ahbar reported that Egypt intends on proposing a NATO-style joint Arab force in that meeting that will be meant to deal with external aggression. The newspaper also reported that the diplomats are currently developing a nuanced proposal so that this will act as a deterrent on the one hand, but will also not be seen as a declaration of war on Israel or an automatic reaction of Arab countries against Israel on the other hand. Second, regarding the ongoing negotiations, immediately after the attack, Qatar announced its official suspension of all negotiation efforts between Hamas and Israel, stating that it would no longer facilitate in any such talks between the sides. The country somewhat backtracked on this several days later, however, likely as a result of the wave of support and encouragement it received, as well as the international pressure to continue negotiations. In addition to that, Hamas also announced on September 10th that it is willing to continue negotiations despite that attack, and the United States, alongside substantial criticism of Israel's decision to carry out that attack, also stated that it hopes the attack will not derail negotiations. At the same time, however, negotiations at this point are officially frozen between the sides. Everyone is likely waiting for clarity on who among Hamas's negotiating team survived that attack in order to see where things can progress. Obviously, we'll learn more in the coming days as we see who survived among the leadership and if Qatar does take a more active role or not. But we probably won't see any movement at least until the conclusion of that meeting of the Arab League, which again is due to take place on Monday. Moving on from this to the Gaza Strip. Over the last week, fighting continued throughout the Strip, with the vast majority of incidents being reported in the northern parts of Gaza, specifically in the areas of Gaza City. On September 7th, the IDF reported detonating a tunnel that stretched hundreds of meters long in the area of Zaytun. And on that same day, the Al-Quds Brigades, that is the military wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, launched 2 rockets from Gaza, targeting the Israeli city of Netivot, that is around this area over here. In addition to that, on September 8th, the Al-Qassam Brigades carried out an elaborate attack against IDF troops in Jabalia refugee camp, that is this area, the northern parts of Gaza City. According to reports, operatives carried out a combined operation when an explosive device was thrown at an IDF tank, causing it to catch fire in the area, and this was followed by a shooting attack at the rescue teams that were arriving on the scene. 4 IDF soldiers were reported killed in that incident. The Israeli military substantially intensified its operations in the area following that incident, with intensive fighting and light bombs being reported over the next 24 hours in northern Gaza. In addition to these, over the past week, the Israeli military continued its airstrikes, targeting primarily the more high-rise towers in Gaza City. Various structures were bombed on September 8th and September 9th in Gaza City, with the Israeli military publishing images stating that each of these was used by Hamas for militant purposes. On September 10th, the Taiba towers were also attacked in the area, and Al Jazeera reported that at least 12 major airstrikes were carried out in the Al-Shadi refugee camp region on September 11th. That is in this area, again, all happening in Gaza City. By Friday, the Israeli military reported that over the past week, 5 major waves of airstrikes were carried out in the Gaza Strip, bombing over 500 targets, according to the Israeli military. These include lookout posts, a Hamas interrogation facility, gathering sites of the Al-Qassam brigades, weapons manufacturing sites, and other such militant sites and sites used for terror activity. Regarding casualties, 4 IDF soldiers were reported killed in the fighting in Gaza over the past week, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion of Gaza began to 460, and 2,893 soldiers reported injured. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip, in turn, reported that 435 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip over the past week, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 64,803, and 164,264 Palestinians reported injured. I remind everyone the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip does not distinguish between militants and civilians. It simply reports the entire number of bodies that have been processed in Gaza hospitals since the war began. Alongside the fighting still in the Gaza Strip, after weeks of buildup and anticipation, on Tuesday of this week, the Israeli military issued a sweeping evacuation order that covers the entire areas of northern Gaza, ordering an estimated 900,000 to 1 million Palestinians in the area to evacuate southward through the Ar-Rashid coastal road towards the Al-Mawasi refugee camp. The evacuation orders that were issued through multiple channels, including leaflets that were dropped in the area and messages broadcasted to Palestinians, included a phone number that Palestinians were instructed to call if Hamas tries to set up checkpoints to block the evacuations. 3 developments occurred following the issuing of that evacuation order. First, while the Israeli military has been calling for the evacuation for several weeks, this latest order appears to have expedited the process for the Palestinian civilians. Thousands of Palestinians were reportedly seen evacuating south through the coastal road in the last several days, with the Israeli military tentatively estimating that between 200,000 to 250,000 people have already evacuated the area. Second, following substantial internal criticism of the Israeli military's legal team, which included the top legal commanders of the IDF warning that the evacuation orders cannot be defended by international law due to unprepared humanitarian infrastructure and living space in southern Gaza, on September 12th, the Israeli military published new maps nearly doubling the humanitarian zone where Palestinians are now supposed to go, areas that will not include active fighting. The Al-Mawasi humanitarian area, which is the coastal area over here, which has been the designated humanitarian zone, has now been expanded to include the refugee camps in the central parts of the Gaza Strip, including the areas of Nuseirat refugee camp, Al-Bureij refugee camp, Al-Zawaida, as well as the city of Deir el-Balah. In total, the humanitarian zone in the Gaza Strip increased from 43 square kilometers to 78 square kilometers, now encompassing 21% of the Gaza Strip. Third, in an almost unprecedented scene, following the evacuation orders that were issued on September 9th, several hundred Palestinians held an unusual protest march in Gaza City, protesting these new evacuation orders and stating that they cannot be continuously moved from place to place. These were reportedly led by some prominent families in the area, and the march left from the Al-Saria Square, which is an area that is very prominent in northern Gaza, with protesters holding signs saying, among others, "We will not be uprooted, stop our extermination, we will not leave, and standing strong in Gaza." I will say there were no reports of violent incidents that occurred in or around these protests that again were held on September 9th. Before I conclude, I also want to say a few words about another arena that's going on in the West Bank, where spirals of violence continue to escalate over the past week. Following the shooting attack that took place in Jerusalem, the Israeli military launched an immediate operation in the two villages that attackers had come from, and there are reports that the IDF's plan is to track the trajectory of the attackers from those villages into Jerusalem and to flatten and destroy all structures that were used on their way into that attack. I will say a similar operation was done in the Al-Moel region in the West Bank last month, where thousands of olive trees were uprooted by the Israeli military after an attack in the area took place, and the military stated that the attacker used the olive trees of the neighboring village in order to hide, and then, according to reports, between 1,000 to 1,500 olive trees of Palestinians were uprooted and the area was flattened. In addition, the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz ordered the destruction of structures that were built without permits in those two villages, and also ordered to cancel work permits of 750 Palestinians, again, all from those two villages where the attackers came from. Meanwhile, in another arena in the West Bank, on September 11th, 2 Israeli soldiers were injured when an explosive device was detonated near an IDF vehicle in the areas of Tulkarem. The Al-Quds brigades of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad claimed responsibility for the attack, and hours later, images were published showing a major IDF crackdown and mass arrests that were being carried out in the areas of Tulkarem. The Israeli military reportedly marched the arrested Palestinians around the city. I'll say also this is a move that used to be employed by the Israeli military during the Second Palestinian Intifada. It has not been employed, according to reports in the West Bank, for at least 20 years. With that, the spirals within the West Bank continue. There were lots of other reports of Palestinians throwing stones at settlers, also reports of settlers raiding a Bedouin area in the areas north of Jerusalem. All going on. There's daily reports of violent spirals continuously in the West Bank as well. That concludes the latest update in the Israel-Palestine Report. If you find these reports informative, please remember to send them on to anyone you think might be interested in them. Hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and an Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.